Do you see these competition guidelines? This is a huge problem for portrait painters right now. And it might be the reason why your work has gotten rejected from shows or just doesn't feel expressive or alive. It's got nothing to do with your technique. So, in this video, I'm going to break down the hidden AI trap that's hurting painters, why it hits portrait painters hardest, and how you can create show stopping work without falling for it. So, why is just about every major competition adding this rule? And how does that relate to the big AI trap painters are falling into, whether they use AI or not? If you've entered shows put on by any big organization, think Portrait Society, Oil Painters of America, American Impressionist Society, you know that AI of any sort is prohibited. And it's not just the AI art, it's AI reference material. So you may be thinking along the lines of this social media post. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so I can do laundry and dishes. So I don't use AI and this doesn't concern me, which fair enough. But this AI issue is probably highlighting a problem you're already grappling with. And I'm going to show you why. Because AI isn't the problem itself. It's highlighting a snag with human psychology that virtually every painter falls victim to, whether we use AI or not. The problem is that quote I shared before that we want AI to do our dishes and laundry so we can make art and write. Did you catch the snag? Most of us got into painting to paint. So the idea of going through the hassle of approaching a model, scouting locations, ensuring proper lighting, gathering the right costuming and props becomes overwhelming. And on top of that, you add something like learning to use a camera or maybe even Photoshop. And it starts to feel like a lot. It can even start to feel like doing the laundry or the dishes, that thing that's stopping you from painting. And so we naturally avoid it all as a result. And this leads to a much bigger problem. We settle for and then we work from weak reference a lot of the time. On the left, this is a painting I did from an unedited reference. I basically sat down and tried to just make it work. And it looked fine, but it got rejected from competitions. Now, on the right, this is one where I took the extra time and energy to make my reference even better until it turned into a crystal clear plan. That one won the OPA gold medal. And I've seen this over and over with my students. If I hand them a gorgeous reference, so clear light and shadow pattern, great angle, easy to flatter model, they suddenly look like better painters. But give them an iPhone candid with backlighting and awkward tilt, that situation where you're so close to the camera that you almost get this fisheye effect, or maybe you give them a tricky facial expression, and then they start to spiral and worry that like maybe I'm just not talented. When really it's like they're painting with a blindfold on because they can't fully picture the masterpiece they want to create. Take this example from Portrait Society. This is from a demo with the master Zhao Wu. When I saw how the model was clothed, posed, and lit, I didn't even need to see his painting. I immediately said, "Oh, this must be the Zhao Ming demo because his entire scene already looked like one of his paintings." But if the model looked like this, you can imagine how much he would have had to change to give it his own signature style and look. When we work from reference that we chose because of convenience, it tends not to be optimized like that. It's built from convenience, not for the kind of composition we actually want to paint. And when it's not optimal, it actually caps the quality of our paintings and make us feel less skilled than we actually are. This is because suboptimal references introduce dozens of problems we have to fix while painting, but often can't. So if you've been feeling overwhelmed, there's a good chance it's not your brushwork. It's that you're starting from a reference that puts you at a huge disadvantage. It's a lot easier to strike gold when you're standing in a literal gold mine versus going out with a pickaxe in your backyard. And if you've been doing that, if you've been trying to just mine gold from your backyard, after a dozen or so attempts, you're probably going to enter a spiral of doubt, which brings us to a huge trap, which is that AI might start to feel like the perfect shortcut because AI promises instant composition, mood, and style without all the labor. But there are three ways that can get you into serious trouble. The first issue you may run into is that AI still kind of sucks. Like, don't get me wrong, if I want to do something really simple, it can do an astonishingly good job. Let's say, for instance, that I want to take this photo of me winning the OPA gold medal and show me holding my first prize ribbon instead of standing next to it. Simple enough. And here AI does a great job, but this is way more convenient than calling up this painting's collector and asking if I could just pose with her new painting so I can get another photo. But the second I have to make something really specific, like make some fan art from my favorite TV show, I can't quite get what I'm after. And the more I try, the more frustrating working with AI becomes. So even if you use it, you probably aren't going to get the results you actually want, even if it feels easier. But that's just one problem. The second issue is that the big shows explicitly prohibit AI, even if all you're using it for is to generate a photo reference to paint from. So, if getting into exhibitions, winning awards, or getting validation from those shows is important to you, it's best to avoid AI so you don't create a masterpiece that no one's willing to showcase. But let's just say, for sake of argument, that you have already decided to use AI. You now have a new problem, and if you aren't careful, it's going to become chronic. The biggest risk isn't that the image looks weird or it's against competition rules. It's actually that if AI starts composing images for you, then you aren't building up your own composition skills, judgment, taste, or voice. A couple months ago, I hosted a panel at Portrait Society about creating your ideal portrait reference. And to the panel covered things like setting up a model, taking photos, and then editing those photos in Photoshop. And there's this retired lady in the front row who raised her hand and said, I think I'm honestly too old to learn all that. But AI sounds interesting. Could I just have AI do all the composing for me? And someone else on the panel said yes. And she just jumped out of her chair and shouted, Sold! And I get it. I love the idea of just walking into the studio and painting with zero planning or extra steps. But that moment really broke my heart because that sold moment will probably cost her the exact thing she's trying to build. So even if playing around with AI takes the frustration of composing or reference gathering away, if AI disappeared tomorrow, would you be able to build that composition from scratch? Would you be able to do it easily with no resistance? One thing I tell my students is that if we can use something when appropriate to enhance our process, that's a tool. But if we have to use it every time, that's a crutch. And we don't want that. But it does lead us to the most exciting opportunity here, which is how do we actually make reference gathering genuinely easy so we don't even want to resort to AI? Let's use that Zhao Ming Wu example. If I wanted to paint figures like Zhao Ming, and I'll show you some examples of his work on screen, but I was starting with this image, I'm probably going to be pretty disappointed, right? So to fix it, I'd probably start by saying, okay, all of these paintings feature models, all of them young women, fair skin, in white drapery. Their hair is down in most of them. The background is pretty blank. There's not like bookshelves or clutter in the scene. And then the light creates a pretty stark light and shadow pattern. And wouldn't you know, that's exactly what he set up in this demo. The lesson here is that if you start with a really clear vision of what you want to paint, that takes out a ton of trial and error. And it's also the key first step to make reference gathering easy. But the big challenge here is that a lot of painters haven't defined what they actually want to make, and it leaves you with these endless possibilities. And that turns into endless problems you have to solve because the answer to how to improve your portraits could be anything. Let me tell you about Mariana. When she came to me, she had painted abstracts. And then she moved into these colorful acrylic portraits. And they were awesome, but they weren't what she wanted to be painting. And she told me that she wanted to take her portraits further. If I had just heard that, asked no further questions, gotten no further clarity, and just said, okay, Here are my best portrait exercises. Do these for a few months and your problem will be solved. If she had done that, she would have just kept creating her old style of portrait, just with some additional technique on top. And the result probably would have looked like what she was already doing, or she would have just defaulted to copying whatever portrait photo was easiest to find. But when I asked her, show me what kind of art really excites you, specifically the kind of portraits that excite you, the stuff that you wish you were making, what she showed me looked nothing like what she'd been painting. And that's the key. We have to begin by getting crystal clear on exactly what kind of portraits you actually want to make. Because once that's solid, a ton of decisions disappear. You get clear about the lighting you want, the mood, the shapes, the color relationships, everything. In Mariana's example, once I saw the direction she wanted to go, I could immediately hand her a ton of guidelines that she would want to consider for any new portrait that she made. First, all of her favorite portraits have a very strong color harmony around beiges, browns, and grays. So, in her own compositions, I encouraged her to choose the backgrounds and the model's hair color in accordance with that. And she'd want to explicitly avoid paintings with huge statement colors like a splash of cadmium red. Next, I noticed that despite a lot of these having very light backgrounds, being in a white painted studio, kind of like what I have here, would probably be overkill because many of these portraits feature quite dark shadow shapes, which is only possible if you don't have a lot of light bouncing into your shadows, which often happens in a room with white walls. Just look at me right now if you need an example of that. There aren't any shadows on my face that get quite as dark as this example portrait here. So far, we've identified that Mariana would want a female model, lighter skin, dark brown hair, in an indoor space without any super vivid color bouncing into the composition. And she probably wouldn't want that indoor space to be one with a ton of white walls. In addition, most of these models are wearing either white or black clothing. The more clear we can get this vision to create a sort of checklist for our compositions, the more overwhelm we actually cut out of the process. And even better, after that, every step gets simpler because you've essentially removed a ton of guesswork from later steps, or removed the need to try and bridge the gap between a reference that just isn't quite lining up with your vision. But even then, our references can't always be perfect. For instance, in Mariana's case, a lot of her portraits are vignettes, and we don't just encounter vignettes out in the wild. Like, I've never seen someone who's just like a floating head against a background. So our subjects are surrounded by backgrounds. So, how do we get a really good, foolproof, crystal clear vignetted reference if we can't just stumble upon that in the wild? This is actually pretty easy to adjust, but only when you have a few key details in place. First, this all works best when you are starting from an image that is as close as possible to your final vision for the work. So if I started with this portrait and I wanted to make it similar to what's on Mariana's inspiration board here, all I really need to do is erase out some of the background details. When I start with this image that's already as close as I can get to the goal before I make this tweak, I only need to make some really minor adjustments, which makes digital tools like Photoshop way less intimidating because I only have to do like one tiny thing, not learn the ins and outs of the entire program. So here's a practical checklist to make this even easier in your own practice. When possible, start by getting the setup from life that's closest to your target aesthetic as possible. If you're going to take a photo, make sure that photo builds on the setup from life if possible. So maybe your setup from life is like really solid. You can build on that by making sure that when you take your photo, the photo goes ahead and crops the scene to the exact cropping you want in your final painting. That gives you a really good preview into the composition. Then use a tool like Photoshop to fine tune out only the things that you couldn't change any other way, like creating a vignette or moving objects that are too large or impossible for you to just physically move from life in the scene. So that might be moving a big tree that's in the background of your composition, or moving a window that you cannot physically move out of a house. And if you're overwhelmed by the prospect of even hiring a model or scouting a location to get started on this process, I get it. This happens to me all the time. So if you're overwhelmed by finding the right location, start by simply analyzing your inspiration and thinking through where those artists must have gone to get that shot, and start creating a list of where you need to go. For instance, I'm not going to create a landscape painting like this unless I go to Croatia. It's not enough to just say it's the beach, because my beaches, the ones I can drive to, look like this. Or here's an Alex Venezia painting that I absolutely love. Well, the other day I was driving around town and happened to find the exact church where the reference for this painting must have been created. The more you create short lists for these kind of locations that you're drawn to, the easier it's going to be to set up your own composition that has the exact look that you're going for. It doesn't mean it's easy to just hop on a plane and fly to Croatia, but it does mean I'm not going to get tempted to say, oh, yeah, I'll just go to the beach to set up a painting like this, because I know full well that would be a waste of time. So maybe Croatia's out, my local beach is out, but hey, if I wanted a painting with the kind of aesthetic of this Alex Venezia piece, I can just go to that church. And if you're overwhelmed by the idea of approaching a model, you can absolutely look at your inspiration board to pick out the key traits that you need to have in models to match your target aesthetic. And if you happen to have a friend or a family member who matches that description, just start there. Chances are they will be more than happy to go on an adventure with you. And the more you do this, the easier it's going to be to find and approach professional models too, because you'll know how to navigate the entire process in a very experienced manner. So now you know the big AI trap, but there's one more problem that quietly derails painters the longest, which is that most painters assume they already have a clear vision of where they're going. They've saved 100 paintings that they love, they're liking art posts on Instagram all the time. They know their vibe and they've been at this for years. Mariana thought the same thing, and her inspiration board looked nothing like what she'd been making. So, watch this video next to get crystal clear on what your ideal reference actually looks like, because it might not be what you think.